This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/Karsten. Are we recording? Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of What I Watched This Month, October edition. Spooky! I started the month by watching Julia Ducournau's new film, Titane. Guys, I'm gonna be really honest with you, I think this is the best movie I've ever seen. No, but seriously, I think it's my movie of the year. Titane is the story about a serial killer, and I don't think I'll say much more about the plot for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, but like Raw, her last movie, this thing is full of body horror and shock, all done so carefully and with such precision. The kind of precision where, like, sometimes she can make the horror a little funny if she wants, sometimes she can make it sad. The film just never feels predictable in where it's taking you, making for a consistently shocking and at times moving experience. It's one of those movies where you think it's going somewhere and then it completely turns itself over and becomes a different kind of movie, only to really bring it home in the third act. You just gotta see it to believe it. It's one of the most unique contemporary horror films I've seen. I will definitely be talking about it more later this year. Then I rewatched Mulholland Drive on 35mm. I loved this movie the first time I saw it, but I was admittedly kind of confused. Go figure. This is one of David Lynch's most popular films, and it's kind of popular for being hard to understand by a lot of people. But on a second watch, and after knowing a little bit more about David Lynch, it all clicked for me, and I had a really good time figuring the whole thing out. The first time I watched it, I thought it was cool, but the second time it left me really uneasy. The ending of this movie, get this, is extremely dark. I always forget that Lynch is one of the best filmmakers when it comes to making some super terrifying stuff that cuts deep, and this movie is kind of the epitome of that for me. I also forgot Billy Ray Cyrus was in this, which is hilarious. Then I went to New York Film Fest and watched Vortex, The Piano, Passing, Come On, El Planeta, Petite Maman, Hit the Road, and Dune. If you want my full thoughts on these guys, you should watch my video all about the festival. And I watched Oni Baba, one of the only horror movies I watched this month, and I just loved it. I've known about this movie for a while just because of its iconic mask, but it ended up being nothing like I was expecting. In actuality, this is less of a horror movie and more of a slow-paced drama about a mother and daughter who are both responding to the indirect effects of war in different ways. Yeah, the masked figure in the night is a terrifying image, but seeing both these women break down is incredibly exhausting and unnerving in an effective way. It's by far one of the best slow burns and one of the most unique takes on the horror genre that I've seen. Then I watched Casino Royale. I'm gonna admit something to you all. This is the first James Bond movie I've seen all the way through. I've watched bits and pieces of many Bond flicks when hanging out with my dad, but this is the first time I actually had any sort of idea what was going on. I loved it a lot. Probably one of my favorite action films ever, to be honest. I have no reference for what a good Bond looks like, but I'd say Daniel Craig is the perfect kind of dude for this. And Mads Mikkelsen is so perfectly creepy, he looks like a fish. I wasn't expecting this to make me squirm as much as it did either. There's some really intense scenes here and there. Let's hope Quantum of Solace is just as good. I've heard nothing but positive things about that one. Then I watched Titane again. Yeah, and I already want to watch it a third time. Then I watched the original Dune. Now, I already sort of touched on this in my Dune video, but hey, I think this is fun. It's not perfect. It really doesn't work at all as a movie, but it's got some really great makeup, some really fun performances, and it's just a good, cheesy watch. Nothing I can take too seriously, though. Then I watched The French Dispatch, my most anticipated movie of the last 2 years. Yes, I do plan on making a Wes Anderson ranked video, so I'll save my in-depth thoughts on this for that, but let me just say that I loved this movie a lot. I know that's extremely predictable as a diehard Wes Anderson fan, but I think this is the most Wes Anderson movie Wes has ever done. He sacrifices a whole lot of character development in the process, but I do not think that was ever a priority for this film. He wanted to pay tribute to storytelling, French culture, and build his own universe in the process, all while playing around with so many different forms of filmmaking that it honestly gets kind of overwhelming. And you know what? I love that. I love everything about it, actually, and I will definitely be talking about it some more in the future. Then I watched The Last Duel. You know, I got mixed feelings on The Last Duel. On one hand, this feels like a very one-noted take on Rashomon and an extremely bland take on the Me Too movement. Not a single person was on the edge of their seat for Ridley Scott's take on everything. But on the other hand, I don't think it's actively doing any harm in that respect, and more importantly, it's pretty fucking cool. These large, medieval, epic, slow-paced action dramas are kind of rare to come by these days. This already feels like a rare kind of movie, and the fact that it has absolutely bombed has made it the last of its kind. But you know what? I had a good time, even if it's not the best thing in the world, and even if it thinks it's way more impactful than it actually is. I felt like I was at the movies in 2007 or something, which was cool. Great performances all around. I'm very excited for House of Gucci. Then I watched The Nightmare Before Christmas. What is there to say? Unfortunately, it wasn't the best stop-motion animated film I saw this month, but it's undeniably well-deserved of its classic status. Then I watched Irma Vep. I don't know how to talk talk about this movie. It's a movie about making a movie told mostly through the perspective of the lead actress. We sort of just watch as the production caves in on itself and everything becomes a disaster. And I never really came around to what the film was trying to say or do. I was kind of finding it hard to connect to in a way, yet I still felt pretty engaged the entire time. It felt like a weird dream or nightmare. Things were moving at a really weird pace. Things that don't normally happen were happening. It took me way too long to realize how funny it actually was too. It's just a weird fever dream of a movie, and I feel like I'm not smart enough to understand it on a deeper level, but I still had a really good time watching it. Really cool ending though. That's what I will say. Then I watched Ring for the first time. I walked in on my parents watching the American remake when I was a child, and it was probably the most scared I've ever been in my life. That movie properly fucked me up, so revisiting the original felt pretty crazy, and I will say definitely not as scary now that I'm older, but still pretty goddamn scary. There's this one shot in the video that is so haunting. It's honestly just a really effective horror movie. I will say, anytime the film slows down and explains what's happening for the sake of explaining what's happening, it kind of loses me. Personally, I'd prefer something like this to keep itself more ambiguous. It just keeps things more terrifying. But overall, it's a very good horror movie. I can't wait to show it to my kids. Then I watched The Worst Person in the World. It ended up being one of my best movies of the year. I've come to realize I really am just a sucker for a good rom-com, especially those that aren't totally cheesy. I'm in my early 20s and somehow watching a movie about someone in their 30s struggling to find themselves / struggling to find any sort of agency in their life is extremely comforting. There's just a lot to connect to here. Like I said on Letterboxd, this movie just gets it. It's one of those that pats you on the back and reminds you that it's all a process, all of it, and you're never really done processing, and that's okay. Then I watched Blazing Saddles while putting together a Lego. Look how cool it turned out. Wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to this, but I still laughed way more than I thought I would. Funny stuff. Then I watched Spencer. This is probably the best looking and sounding movie I've ever seen. Maybe that's a stretch, but holy shit, this is a beautiful movie. Every shot feels just a little off and a little warped, like she doesn't belong in any of these settings, and that's so cool to me. A huge shout out to Claire Mathon, who shot this and Portrait of a Lady on Fire. She is a god. And the score has a jazz thing going for it, which I did not think would work this well in a movie like this, but it did. Kristen Stewart is phenomenal and will probably win the Oscar. The dialogue is incredibly sharp and intense. I mean, all the pieces are there. It's a damn near perfect movie. Only thing is, there's nothing about it that particularly stuck with me, which doesn't make it a bad movie by any means. I'm just surprised this didn't sink its way into my core the way it should have. Because in many ways, I feel like this is a stretch, but it kind of reminded me of First Reformed and just how psychological it felt. But I'll definitely be seeing it again, so maybe a second watch will do me better. Then I watched Mad God, the movie that VFX legend Phil Tippett has been making for 30 years. That's longer than I've been alive. Seeing as though I'm a sucker for stop motion, gross guys, short movies, and vaguely existential stories, I am completely obsessed with this movie right here. Some of these creatures are genuinely some of the grossest things I've ever seen in a movie. The vulgarity of this thing is on another level. There's hairy guys with no faces. There's people shitting out of boobs. It's inspiring to watch something that someone pretty much lived in for a good portion of their life and see it not hold back in any way. It's a beautiful, funny, disgusting masterpiece in world building and storytelling. Then I watched Hong Sang-soo's In Front of Your Face. I really don't have much to say about this. I almost fell asleep multiple times. I had a very tough time connecting to the main character. I didn't find the conversations to be nearly as interesting as those in The Woman Who Ran, but I still admire Hong's approach. It's different, and there is something extremely authentic and touching about watching his movies. It just sometimes is too authentic, I guess. I just feel dumb watching this. Then I rewatched The French Dispatch because I can. Then I watched Memoria in a theater because, well, that's the only way you can see this movie. Honestly, a lot of my excitement surrounding this screening had mostly to do with the fact that I don't know if I ever would have been able to see this movie given its distribution. But all that aside, I can totally see why this needs to be seen in a large, dark, silent room. The cinematography is beautiful and extremely inviting, but the sound is the real star of the show here. The sound design in this movie is on another planet, holy fuck. It uses silence so well so that when these large booms come in, it's kind of terrifying to experience. It's an easy movie to get sucked into, even if it's extremely slow paced, but I could have watched this odd thing unfold for hours. Not that awards matter at this point, and not that I think this has any chance, but I really think this deserves best sound at the Oscars this year. And all of that aside, I just have no idea what this movie is about. There, I said it. But it's a good one. And I rewatched Dune in IMAX. If you have the chance to see this thing in IMAX, I'm begging you to please see it in IMAX. That's all I have to say. Then I rewatched Over the Garden Wall. Yeah, it's great. Then I watched Robert Bresson's Alcazar Balthazar. I'm a big fan of Robert Bresson, and this is one of his most critically acclaimed of all time, so I unsurprisingly ended up loving it. His minimalist approach and choice to use actors less as people and more as models through which he can get his ideas across as simply as possible is so hypnotizing and effective to me. He makes movies as though he invented movies and knows how to use it exactly how it's meant to be used. I found this film specifically to be incredibly depressing in what it had to say about suffering and how it went about saying that through a donkey. I know that sounds kind of funny, like an ass, but it's actually just so devastating. I don't know how he got such a great performance out of a donkey, but he did. I love this movie a lot, and I'll be thinking about it for a while. Then I watched Scream. It's only been a year since I watched this for the first time, and I gotta say, it's not as important to watch this a second time as I thought it'd be. I really didn't pick up on a ton of new stuff. In fact, this is one of the simplest horror films I've ever seen, which is probably why it's just so much fun to watch. I enjoy this movie a lot. Then I watched Scream 2 for the first time. This is not as good as Scream by any means, but again, a pretty solid movie. This just seems like a Scooby-Doo movie stretched into a feature-length film, whereas Scream felt like a really clever take on horror in film. It's fun, sure, but it honestly feels kind of soap opera at a certain point, and I really don't think this is something I'm ever gonna revisit. Then I finished the month by watching Last Night in Soho, the latest from Edgar Wright. I didn't even write down a part in the script for this movie. I'm going completely off the cuff because I think I have enough to say to fill this time. I like Edgar Wright a lot. I think he's one of the best filmmakers working today, and this is one of the worst movies I saw this year. I'm severely disappointed in just how bland and uncool and empty this film is. It's like trying to say something about the past and how we're too caught up in the past and something about feminism, I guess. But these two characters that he's telling the movie through are like not people. I don't believe anything they're doing. Nothing they do makes sense. He doesn't give enough time for either of them to flesh themselves out and for us to see any sort of character in them. It feels like it's not really going anywhere at the beginning, and then it sort of turns into something in the second half when there's all these ghostly elements and it gets kind of cool. And then in the third act, where it just tries really hard to explain itself / add some sort of emotional depth to the story, it all kind of falls on its face because there was none of that to begin with. It's just a mess. This movie's a mess. The CGI looks bad. It really looks bad. The lighting in this thing feels kind of cheap and honestly really exhausting after a certain point. Like, we get it, there's a red light and there's a blue light. The performances aren't bad, but they're just severely underused. Like, they don't feel like they're given anything to work with, and as a result, the character comes off extremely one-noted. It's just a movie that works completely on the surface level. It's like, hey, this is a tragic person, and hey, this lighting is colorful, and this takes place in the 60s, but it really does not go any further than just saying those things and hoping you're interested. I just found it to be extremely boring, extremely corny, and for a guy as cool as Edgar Wright, this was the least cool movie I've seen all year. I also watched the first 2 episodes of season 3 of Succession, and oh my god, my head feels like it's gonna explode in a good way. And hey, that's what I watched this month. Thanks for watching. Go watch all these films and form your own opinion, and if you're looking for your next movie to watch, you should check out today's sponsor, Mubi. Mubi is a curated streaming service, a place to watch beautiful, interesting, and incredible cinema. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover. With Mubi, each and every film is hand-selected. It's like your own personal film festival, streaming anytime, anywhere. This month, as you can tell, I went to 2 festivals and watched a lot of new and amazing movies, and if you don't want to leave the house or spend that much money, Mubi is a great way to experience a lot of interesting and incredible cinema. Because again, it's all curated. It's not some algorithm computer thing. It's stuff that people actually thought was interesting and that you'll probably find interesting as well. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/Karsten. That's mubi.com/Karsten for a whole month of great cinema for free.